It is that Halloween time of year, which means you know we're going to get some nerdy news of the spooky variety in this videos now and again. This one pertaining to the new Exorcist movie and how, despite actually a pretty strong opening box office, things are not looking good long haul wise for the Exorcist franchise now, as they're calling it. Welcome back to Words of Paradise. I'm your host, Leon Idle, and yeah, let's talk about why, Warner Brothers put a lot of money into this, and it's looking like it may not be worth it, despite, again, actually a pretty strong opening weekend. So before we get into that, please go ahead and do subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get to 2,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and with us just crossing the 1,600 mark, that's looking pretty doable. You guys can help be a part of that. But, enough of that. Let's get into the article, shall we? The Exorcist Believer's box office raises horrifying questions about the franchise's future, and there's the woman that's going to be bringing a lot of people into question. Now, the article isn't going to talk about one thing in particular. I'm going to talk about, actually, it's not going to talk about two things in particular. I'm not going to, but just remember this face. It'll be important later. One of the biggest horror movies of the year hit theaters over the weekend in the form of The Exorcist Believer. Yes, it was a week earlier than initially anticipated, as Universal and Blumhouse had to make room for Taylor Swift's forthcoming blockbuster concert film. If I said Warner Brothers earlier, I meant to say Universal, by the way. My bad. I can't remember which I said, but I'm pretty sure I screwed up and said Warner Bros. But yeah, Universal. And the Taylor Swift movie is going to dominate. They've made a very good call in moving this up a week early. That way it's not competing with itself against that way Universal is not competing against themselves with the Taylor Swift box office, because that is going to crush. You're looking, I'm not even being joking when I say this. Like the pre-sale ticket sales for the Taylor Swift movie has rivaled Avengers Endgame. I'm not exaggerating. It's going to do insane numbers. Anyway, so do with that information what you will. Still, director David Gordon Green's revival of the iconic horror series, which is set at the beginning of a new trilogy, topped the charts on its debut. And there's the first word I want to focus on, a trilogy. If you saw this and thought, oh, this could be a fun one-off Halloween film, they're bringing The Exorcist back after years. Well, first of all, I could understand you guys for forgetting. This is actually the fourth Exorcist film. A lot of people don't seem to remember that 2 and 3 exist, and frankly, for good reason. Actually, 3's not bad, but 2, awful. Anyway, so yeah, this is the fourth Exorcist film, and what will now be a new Exorcist trilogy, so, 6 movies in all if you count the original 3. That sounds awful. That just sounds truly terrible, especially when this is being done by the same people that did the recent Halloween trilogy, because we already had an inordinate amount of Halloween films, and now you've got 3 more on top of it that are their own unique trilogy, despite the fact they're highly tethered to the original Halloween, which would actually make it, a quadrilogy. It's an absolute mess. It's something that horror fans have been complaining about for a long time now, and now we're seeing that same mistake being made with The Exorcist, especially since people don't like the second and third entries into the Halloween Ends, Kills, Begins, whatever the name of that trilogy is. Like, people don't like the 2 most recent films, and now they're starting an Exorcist trilogy where nobody likes the first film. Okay, again, the first sequel film. Everyone loves the original Exorcist, and then, yeah, they think things aren't looking good. Unfortunately, though, Universal Pictures bet very big on this franchise, and that may come back to bite them. Yes, they did bet big on this franchise. I don't know about you guys. I always thought of The Exorcist as just The Exorcist. It's never been a film franchise. Like, yes, it technically has. It had its second and third film, but not that in the public consciousness, The Exorcist was just one uniquely brilliant, universally beloved or reviled, depending on how you look at it, horror film. It's honestly some people consider it the magnum opus of horror movies. If you're going to talk about the greatest horror movies ever made, there aren't a lot of options out there that can even compete with The Exorcist. What do you have? Maybe The Shining, maybe the original Halloween, and that's it. Like I can't think of any horror movies that are genuine competition for greatest horror film of all time until you get to, at least in the modern era, in the color movie era, until you get to, The Exorcist. Again, yeah, Halloween, and that's really bad. Yeah, Halloween and the Shining. Like, this movie is not looked at as a trilogy. It's looked at as one singular entity. And the fact that they decided, hey, let's take this and make it a trilogy, people aren't going to go for that. People are sick of franchise fatigue. I mean, people have been calling it superhero fatigue. It's not just future hero fatigue or superhero fatigue. It's franchise fatigue. We don't always want to go see, remakes and sequels, and then you start planning sequels out in advance for movies that you don't even know if they're going to do well. Now, granted, again, this one does seem to have done well initially. I actually don't think it's going to make its budget back. We're getting to that in just a minute here. But yeah, no one was like, hey, let's go see this new Exorcist film because it's the setup for a new Exorcist trilogy. That's not what's going on. Movies like The Exorcist, they don't require, in fact, they almost want you to not be a franchise fan, because this is something that should be introduced, you could introduce it to anybody. It's universal for everyone. You're not going to get the same casual, going crowd as like superhero movies or Expendables action movies. Even Expendables 4 got crushed at the box office. It died because no one cares anymore about these, sequel bait movies. Your best bet would have easily been just to every now and again make a one-off Exorcist movie that doesn't relate to one another, almost like, Exorcist anthology films, if you're going to bring this property back at all. Now, frankly, I would have been in the camp of don't bring back this property at all, but I don't think there's any product there or property they're not going to just, grave rob to get at this point. So if it's going to happen, stop doing it in this predictable manner that fans and customers really are already souring on. Looking at Believer, divorced of the larger picture, it performed pretty well in the early going. According to the numbers, the film took in $27.2 million, easily taking the #1 spot at the box office. That was slightly below industry projections, with the opening productions pegged at $30 million or more ahead of the weekend. Regardless, that's not a bad start for a movie with a $30 million production budget, particularly when looking at a $17.8 million the film took in overseas. So yeah, not bad. It's got $45 million global to start with. $45 million global to start with actually is pretty good, considering this movie needs to make about $90 million to make a profit. Because yes, you guys have to remember, $30 million budget, plus probably about that in marketing, give or take, and then you've also got the theater's cut, the theater's share, both foreign and domestic. When you do all those numbers, it's going to come out to be somewhere between 75 and 90 million. So yeah, let's go 90 million on the high end just to be sure. That way you know if it crosses 90 million, boom, movie is in fact it's a success. It's made its money back, it's making profit. That's a good indicator. So it got 45 million out the gate. It's already halfway there. That sounds awesome on the surface. Things are not looking good when you look behind the scenes, though. Making 1.5 times the production budget, not counting marketing, come Monday morning would be an absolute win for almost any movie. The first problem is the reaction to the film has been less than stellar thus far. Critics have been pretty unkind to the return of The Exorcist, with the film carrying a very poor 22% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes to go with a mere 59% audience score. So, remember how I talked about that $90 million profit margin there? It might not get that. If we're talking about it made $45 million thus far on opening weekend, and everyone hates it, critics and audiences alike, man, word of mouth is not going to be kind to this film. People are going to be talking about it around the water cooler, about how crap it is, or they're not going to be talking about it at all. Either one, not going to inspire a lot of confidence for people to keep going beyond the opening box office. Movies like this, if you've got bad word of mouth, then they live and die in the opening box office numbers. So for them to go on to create, over 90 million, I'm not saying it's impossible. You might have some people who are just not paying attention or don't care what people say, or it's the spooky season. So regardless of what people say, they're going to want to go see it for themselves anyway, just to get in the mood for the Halloween vibe. All that could definitely help catapult this to over $90 million. But even then, things are still not necessarily looking good, even if it does make its money back after these bad reviews. And here's why. This is one piece of a $400 million puzzle. Yes, so remember that $30 million production budget we were talking about, plus marketing, probably closer to $60 million? That's all part of a larger $400 million deal. And oh boy, is this where the story gets good. That's a real problem for Universal, given the studio made a $400 million commitment for the aforementioned Exorcist trilogy. We were talking about a trilogy earlier. They're still on the hook for. In 2021, Universal made a mammoth deal with Morgan Creek Entertainment for the rights to make not one, but 3 new movies in the franchise. Given that Green was the man behind the recent blockbuster Halloween trilogy, that may have seemed like a good idea at the time, but 2018's Halloween wasn't originally meant to be a trilogy, and boy does that show. Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends only came out after the first installment because the highest grossing slasher film in history, $255.4 million worldwide on a $10 million budget. So it's very obvious what they were thinking they could do here. Recreate the exact same magic with The Exorcist. The Exorcist and Halloween are not the same. Halloween is known as a franchise. The Exorcist is known as a singular vision that just happened to get a couple other crappy films. Also, a $10 million budget. I don't think that they had a whole lot of interest in that film to begin with, but whatever. They had the rights. Let's go ahead and do it, see what happens. We're gonna make, $60 million worldwide. That'll be a good enough profit. They weren't expecting $255.4 million worldwide. Obviously, sequels were going to come. Those sort of things usually happen inorganically. When you go out there and these movies that become these massive blockbuster successes, when you think that they've got these, really low budgets, or it's an inexperienced filmmaker or something sort of underground, and then it blows up. I love those sort of success stories. But they gotta happen organically. You can't catch lightning in a bottle twice. And it's very obvious that that's what Universal's trying to do with The Exorcist. And it is not gonna work. And now, because it's not gonna work, they still contractually are obligated to make 2 more films for this, $400 million price tag, 3 films total. That does include the budget, though. So when we're talking about the budgetary and whatnot, so of the $400 million, so far, about $60 million of it has been used to make this first Exorcist movie. They've got about $340 million left to play with for the second and third movies. Obviously, I doubt they're going to spend all that money, considering there's going to be no return on investment, because people have panned this first movie so much, no one's going to give a damn about the sequels. But people could always change their minds if they keep releasing these movies around Halloween. People just forget, oh yeah, the last one was crap, let's go see this new one, because they just want to be jazzed up and in the mood for the spooky season. So it's entirely possible, who knows, maybe these movies will actually keep making money regardless of them being bad. Also, remember how I told you to remember the old woman in the photo from the previous Exorcist film? Yeah, I told you to remember her just to illustrate what the movie does. Also tells you to remember her, but then nothing really happens with her. Like, yeah, there's some culture war hubbub about her blaming the patriarchy for the fact that she didn't get to witness the original exorcism in the 70s. I was gonna make a video on that, but honestly, Horror Amarada, if you guys are familiar with her. If not, check out her channel. She's incredible. If you are, she made some pretty interesting points on Twitter. I think I'm just going to let her handle that aspect of it. I like what she had to say. I ain't going to try and claim her ideas my own and my, the thoughts I now have on that patriarchy nonsense that was in the film. You could take all that out. You could take the patriarchy, culture war stuff out of the film. It's one random one-off line drop, and it would still honestly probably be a very crappy film, because if this whole thing was, woke garbage, the critics would be all over it. But they ain't. The critics are calling this a 22%. So I'm not even going to bother with the culture war aspect. I'm just going to go on full nerd news. Guys, this isn't looking good. And even financially, if it did well in the opening week, which I will give credit for, it did do well its opening weekend financially. That is not going to translate to long-term gains, and I don't think anyone cares. We're all just going to watch the original Exorcist anyway. This movie was never destined to be, oh, it's a Halloween must-watch every year. That's what the original's for, and that's what the original will always be for. The original holds up to this day. This wasn't something that needed any sequels to begin with. The Exorcist has never been a franchise that needs sequels. You can get away with that stuff with Halloween. You can get away with that stuff with Friday the 13th. You can get away with that stuff with Nightmare on Elm Street, because they are inherently fun and cheesy regardless of which movie it is, when the movie is. The Exorcist was always very serious horror. It was very serious religious-based horror that took itself seriously. It was never a campy franchise sort of film. Again, not sequels notwithstanding, but the first Exorcist was always worthy of being taken seriously as a horror film. Those sorts of movies do not need sequels, especially, shiny, big budget franchise sequels. These aren't Marvel movies. But those are just my opinions. Let me know yours in the comments down below, or let me know on X, where you can find me at Bolt the Word. And please do subscribe. I am a nerdy news channel. I cover nerdy news every day. I'm not just going to focus exclusively on the spooky news, even though it's the spooky time of year, but you might get a little bit more of those sorts of videos here and there throughout the course of the month, because, I do love me some Halloween, second favorite month of the year. In fact, I might be doing a Halloween stream on Halloween night. Who knows? I'm sort of up in the air. Either way, please do check out my socials. You can find me on Instagram at wordsofparadise_Leon. And be sure to check out the back catalog if you're interested in other videos on nerdy subjects like, Castlevania, or how terribly ugly the Mary Jane face model is. But until next time, it's all here in the Nerdosphere, and this has been Words of Paradise.